The afternoon sun blazed over the small frontier town of Willow Creek, turning the dirt road into shimmering gold. The air smelled of sweat, horses, and desperation. Men stood clustered near the old corral, their hats tilted low to block the light, waiting for the next poor soul to be led onto the rough wooden stage. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip, calling out numbers, trading lives like cattle. Somewhere in that crowd, beneath the heavy silence and hungry stares, stood a young woman named Clara May. Her hands trembled around the thin shawl that barely covered her shoulders. Dust clung to her skirt and to her cheeks, streaked with dried tears. She had lost everything, her father to the fever, her mother to grief, and the small patch of land they'd once farmed to debt. She had nothing left to sell except herself. When her uncle brought her here, promising it was the only way to survive, Clara had believed she'd at least find work or food. She hadn't realized she'd be sold like a horse to the highest bidder. The men around her murmured and whispered, their eyes sharp as knives. But one man stood apart, a tall rancher with gray in his beard and the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. His name was Ethan McGraw, and though his hat shadowed his face, there was a steadiness in his gaze that didn't match the cruelty of the others. He hadn't come to buy anyone. He'd come because the noise from the auction drifted across his land every Saturday, and it made his stomach turn. But today, something had drawn him to town, a feeling he couldn't explain. When Clara was pushed forward, the crowd stirred. Young, strong, the auctioneer shouted, "Good with chores, start the bidding at 20. Numbers flew through the air like bullets. Clara tried to hold her chin high, but her body shook with fear and shame. She had never felt smaller. She had never felt more alone. Then Ethan spoke, quiet but firm. 50. The crowd hushed. The auctioneer blinked, surprised, then grinned. 50. Do I hear 55? No one answered. The rancher's voice, calm as the wind, ended the bidding before it began. A few minutes later, Clara was handed a paper contract she couldn't read, and Ethan was told to take his purchase. But instead of leading her like a possession, he handed her the reins of his horse and said softly, "You can ride if you want. It's a long way to my ranch." She hesitated, unsure whether this was kindness or another kind of control. But when she met his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, respect. And so she rode beside him into the evening light. The journey to McGraw Ranch was quiet. They crossed rolling hills and golden fields, where cattle grazed lazily under the fading sky. Clara stole glances at him, trying to read his face. His hands were rough from years of work, his shoulders broad but tired, and his voice when he finally spoke was gentle. "You got a name, Miss Clara?" she said, almost whispering. "Well, Miss Clara," he said, "you're safe now. Nobody'll lay a hand on you at my place. You'll work if you choose, eat when you're hungry, and leave when you're ready. I didn't buy you to own you. I bought you to free you." The words hit her harder than the sun ever could. She turned away, blinking fast, her throat tight with disbelief. No one had spoken to her like that since her father. When they reached the ranch, the house stood like a promise, simple, whitewashed, surrounded by oak trees and open fields. A dog barked as they approached, and two children ran out from the porch, a boy and a girl, twins by the look of them, no older than 10. "Pa," the girl shouted, "you're home." Ethan swung off his horse and smiled, his whole face softening. "Kids, this here's Miss Clara. She'll be staying with us for a while." The children smiled shyly, and Clara's heart squeezed at their innocence. She hadn't seen a child smile in so long. Inside, the house smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. Ethan's late wife's picture hung above the hearth, a beautiful woman with the same calm in her eyes that Ethan had. "My wife, Mary," he said quietly when he caught Clara looking. "She passed 5 winters ago. Been just me and the kids since." Clara nodded, unsure what to say. She busied herself with washing dishes, feeding the dog, anything to keep from thinking too much. But every kindness from Ethan made her chest ache more. Freedom was something she'd forgotten how to feel. That night, as the house grew still, she sat on the porch under a sky full of stars. The sound of crickets filled the air. Ethan stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Feels strange, not being afraid." Ethan nodded slowly. "Takes time," he said. "But fear doesn't get to live here. Not anymore." For the first time in years, Clara smiled, a small, trembling smile, but real. Days turned into weeks. Clara learned to cook for the family, mend fences, and ride out with Ethan to check the herd. The children adored her. Little Emma followed her everywhere, asking endless questions, while Tommy begged her to tell stories before bed. Laughter began to return to the house, cautious at first, like a bird afraid to land, then stronger, freer. But in the town below, whispers started to spread. Men muttered that Ethan had gone soft, that no good ever came from buying trouble. And Clara knew that one day, those whispers would find her. Yet every time she saw Ethan's steady gaze across the breakfast table, she believed a little more that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future here. One stormy night, lightning cracked across the sky, and the old barn roof gave way under the wind. Ethan rushed out to save the horses, and Clara followed without a thought. Together they fought the storm, ropes whipping, rain drenching them both. When it was finally over, Ethan looked at her, soaked and shaking, and said with a weary smile, "You've got the heart of this ranch now." Something in those words rooted deep inside her. She wasn't a purchase anymore. She wasn't a burden or a name on a list. She was home, and though neither of them said it aloud that night, both knew something had changed forever. The first light of dawn spilled across the valley like gold dust, turning the wet grass into silver fire. After the storm, the ranch looked wounded but alive. Broken fences, fallen branches, and mud tracks scarred the land, but for the first time, Clara felt like she belonged among the wreckage. She woke before anyone else, tied her hair back, and went straight to work. The barn still smelled of rain, and as she swept the hay, she hummed a tune her mother once sang in better days. Ethan found her there hours later, sleeves rolled up, face glowing with effort. He leaned on the doorway, watching silently. For a man who had lost almost everything, moments like this were rare, a quiet kind of miracle. When Clara noticed him, she smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied. "You don't have to start this early, you know." Clara shrugged. "Can't sleep much when there's work to do." Ethan chuckled, stepping closer. "You remind me of Mary. She used to say the same thing." His voice softened at his late wife's name. Clara lowered her eyes, feeling a tenderness she didn't know how to name. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm after that storm. Ethan repaired the barn roof. Clara planted new flowers by the porch. The children grew closer to her each day, their laughter echoing through the open fields. One afternoon, when Clara braided Emma's hair, the little girl said, "I wish you were our ma." Clara froze, the comb still in her hand. She didn't know what to say, but her heart ached in the gentlest way. That night, as she stood by the window watching the moon rise, Ethan's voice came from behind her. "They've taken a liking to you," he said. "I've taken a liking to them," she answered, turning to face him. He smiled, a tired, grateful smile. "You've brought something back to this place, Clara. Peace, maybe, or just a bit of light." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "You gave me my freedom, Ethan. Maybe peace is what comes after that." But peace didn't last long in Willow Creek. One evening, a group of men rode up the dusty road toward the ranch, rough, loud, and reeking of whiskey. Clara recognized one of them instantly. Her uncle, the man who had taken her to the auction. Her stomach twisted in fear. Ethan stepped onto the porch, calm but wary, his rifle leaning by the door. "Ethan McGraw," the uncle drawled, swinging off his horse. "Heard you bought yourself a girl. Figured you wouldn't mind me comin' to collect." She's not yours to collect, Ethan said evenly. The man sneered. You think money erases blood? She's kin, and kin don't run off without permission. Clara stepped forward, trembling but defiant. You sold me, she said. You lost any right to call me kin. The man's face twisted with anger. You always were too proud for your own good. Before he could take another step, Ethan's voice cut through the air like thunder. That's enough. The quiet fury in his tone silenced every man on the porch. You leave this land, now, or you'll answer to me. There was a long, tense silence. Then, with a curse and a glare, the men turned their horses and rode off into the dark. Clara stood frozen, the weight of years of fear melting into the dirt beneath her feet. Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. They won't bother you again, he said softly. She turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. Why are you so kind to me? He looked out across the fields, his voice low. Because once, someone was kind to me when I didn't deserve it. Maybe this is how I repay that debt. The next morning, the ranch felt lighter, freer. Clara rode out with Ethan and the children to mend fences under a sky so blue it seemed to promise something. The sun warmed her skin, the wind tugged at her hair, and laughter floated on the air again. For the first time in years, Clara wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Weeks passed. The town eventually forgot the gossip. Life moved on. One Sunday, Ethan hitched the wagon and told the kids to dress nice. When Clara asked where they were going, he only smiled. They rode into town, stopping at the small white church near the river. Inside, it smelled of pinewood and candles. The preacher greeted them warmly. Ethan turned to Clara, his eyes steady but soft. I figured it was time you had your name set right, he said. No contracts, no debts, just your choice. He held out a simple silver ring, the kind a man wears when words aren't enough. I won't ever ask you to stay unless you want to. But if you do, if you'll have us, we'd be honored to call you part of this family. Clara's breath caught. She thought of every mile she'd walked, every night she'd prayed for freedom, and every kindness this man had shown her when the world gave her none. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, yes. The children cheered, the preacher smiled, and Ethan slipped the ring gently onto her hand. In that quiet, sunlit church, the past finally lost its power. Clara wasn't a girl sold in desperation anymore. She was a woman loved, chosen, and free. Years later, people in Willow Creek would tell stories about Ethan McGraw and the woman who turned his ranch into a home. They'd say she had a heart as wild as the prairie and hands that healed whatever they touched. And when visitors asked how they met, Ethan would smile and say, by grace, not by chance. Clara would laugh softly then, her children at her side, her heart at peace. Because some stories don't begin with love, they grow into it. Some lives don't start with freedom. They fight for it, one breath, one kindness, one act of courage at a time. And in the golden fields of Willow Creek, beneath skies that stretched forever, Clara finally learned what home truly meant.